Hello, AP Biologists. Mrs. Grider here to talk about energy in living organisms, one of your summer homework topics. By the end of this video, you should know about the laws of conservation. You should know where energy and mass go in an organism, why energy transfer is not 100% efficient, and how to calculate percentages. Let's get started. So, mass and energy. Quick review. Mass is also referred to as matter in our case. It's made up of molecules, the stuff that's in an organism. When we're talking about living things, this means it's muscles, bones, organs, all the parts of it that we can see and hold. Energy in science is defined as the capacity of matter and electromagnetic radiation to do work. So that's all of the energy that is contained in that organism. Now, to remind you, if you watched the nutrient cycles video and also the ecological pyramids video, some of this will be familiar. But there's a relationship between energy and mass. The packet, in this case, is really only talking about energy and mass in terms of the food consumed by an organism. So that's how I'm going to talk about it right now. Energy is stored in the molecular bonds of the food. So food has mass. It's made up of molecules, and the energy that's in that food that the organism is going to have to get out of the food is stored in the bonds. So here's a molecule of glucose, which is a sugar that appears in many foods. And glucose has these molecular bonds that are represented by lines right here between our elements. And so the energy in this glucose molecule is contained in these bonds. In order to get the energy out of the food, out of the mass and the matter that the organism consumes, it is going to have to break that glucose down to release the energy that is inside those bonds. So once again, energy is stored in the molecular bonds of the food. Now, there's a couple of laws of conservation that you learned about in your chemistry class. Whether you remember them or not, I won't judge. But in general, the laws of conservation say that mass and energy in a system cannot be created and they cannot be destroyed. They always exist at the beginning and they always exist at the end. Therefore, we have to keep track and we should be able to account for where all of the mass and energy that is consumed by an organism is at any given time. So if we watch an organism eat food, we should be able to actually count how much mass and energy is used in each of various processes. That's the whole point of this packet, to start you thinking about how do I track and how can I account for the mass and the energy that an organism is using in its food consumption. Okay, so where do mass and energy go after they're eaten? Reminder, mass is in grams, energy is in kilocalories. There are 4 options for this: respiration, heat loss, egestion, and an increase in biomass. Here's a note. The packet is trying to get you to see that in Model 1 and Model 2, it did not finish accounting for all 4 of these options. You are supposed to identify which of those pieces is missing in Model 1 and Model 2. And so any energy or mass that is not accounted for, when you add it up, you should be able to assign it to the missing categories. Use the list to help you figure out where did the missing mass or energy go? What happened to it that the packet wants me to figure out? Okay, I'm going to talk about each of these processes in a little bit more detail. So once again, there are 4 ways that energy and mass can be used in an organism. The first one that the packet is going to talk about is respiration. Now, usually in common language, when we talk about respiration, we're talking about breathing, okay? Now, in biology, we're actually talking about something called cellular respiration some of the time when we talk about the word respiration. And cellular respiration is not breathing. It's related to breathing, but it's not the same thing. Cellular respiration is the process of breaking down glucose in order to make ATP. So this is the glucose molecule. You can also see it represented down here. We can tell it's the same thing because it has the same elements and it has this hexagonal shape. So here's glucose down here. And glucose is being broken down in order to make ATP. ATP is an energy source that our cells use. I kind of think of it like gasoline for cells. It's the fuel that's going to run all of the cellular processes in your body. Now, when we break down glucose, because mass and energy can't be lost, we break down glucose, we put in some oxygen, and we get carbon dioxide and water. This is a balanced equation, just like you did in your chemistry classes. No atoms are created or destroyed. And in the same way, ATP is going to be created using these high energy bonds that we talked about before. When we rip glucose apart, it releases the energy in those bonds, and that is going to be put into ATP. Okay, so that's what respiration is. However, respiration is a really complicated process, and in order to actually break down the glucose, you have to use some of the energy that you already have. So one way that organisms use their energy is to start this process of respiration in order to make more ATP. I know that this is confusing and that there's two aspects to it, right? We're using energy in order to make an energy source in ATP. But this is one of the places that energy goes. The organism has to invest energy in order to break down glucose so that we can make more ATP. Another way that energy is lost is through heat. And this happens simply because your body is doing millions of chemical reactions every second that you are alive. And many of these chemical reactions release heat as a byproduct. In particular, as endotherms, warm-blooded animals, we can actually control the number of chemical reactions that we do in the body to either heat our body up or to cool it down, depending on what our temperature needs are. This is in order to maintain that homeostasis. But whenever chemical reactions are happening, heat is being released simply because chemical reactions aren't 100% efficient and they release heat as a byproduct. So far we've talked about two processes, right? Energy that the organism uses can either be used to do respiration or is lost as heat to the environment. Now, some matter and energy is also lost to egestion, also known as pooping or getting rid of solid waste. So remember, energy is contained in the molecular bonds of food. I showed you that at the beginning, right? The energy in our food is contained in the bonds of the molecules. So if there are still molecules at the end of the pooping process, and yes, poop is made of molecules just like all other matter on Earth, then there is some energy inside of those molecules that's being pooped out. Your body is not able to get out every last bit of energy from the food. There are still molecules at the end, which means that there is still energy in those molecules at the end. So your body won't be able to use every bit of the energy. Some of it will be pooped out in the molecules at the end of the process. The last way that we can use energy in our bodies is through biomass increase. So biomass increase, what that means is simply growing. It can either mean growing up, getting taller, or growing out, getting wider. But that simply means that we've added more molecules to the organism. And if we've added molecules, that means we've added molecules that have energy in their molecular bonds. So more energy has been added to our body as we grow. I know that this is a little bit confusing because you might be thinking, well, if I get fatter, right, does that mean that I have more energy? In a scientific sense, yes. You have more molecules in your body which have energy contained in those bonds. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have a more energetic personality. It doesn't mean that you're doing more things, but it means that you have more energy stored inside you. All right, I'm going to go back to this slide right here. Remember, there's 4 options for how mass and energy can be used: respiration, heat loss, egestion, and biomass. Some of these help our body to grow when we increase in biomass, or help our body to gain relevant energy to help power our cells in the form of ATP. That's respiration. Heat loss and egestion are considered waste. Our body isn't using those things. Those things are just left to the environment, but they're byproducts of what happens as we go through the processes of respiration and increasing our biomass and digesting our food. So I want to emphasize, some of these processes are really useful for the body. Respiration is useful for the body, gives us ATP. Increasing in biomass is useful for the body. It helps us grow. Heat loss and egestion, not as useful, but they're things that happen along the way as we digest our food and as our body functions. If you know how to calculate the percentages, if the math was easy for you, then skip the next part. Otherwise, I'm going to do a brief review on calculating percentages at the end. It's actually in the middle of the packet. So at various points, the packet asks you to calculate percentages of energy that are not used efficiently or that would be available to a carnivore. And a percent, just remember, is a part of a total. So in this case, the question is going to ask you about a certain type of energy from a category in the question. This could, for example, be energy that's not used efficiently or energy that's available to the carnivore. And in order to calculate the percent, you simply have to divide that by the total energy that the organism ingested in its food. So total energy is what was contained in the original food. This energy is going to be from the question itself. If you multiply that by 100, you're able to get your percentage. All right. Now you should know laws of conservation, where energy and mass can go in the organism, why energy transfer is not 100% efficient, so that's what's useful for the body, what's not as useful, and how to calculate percentages. As always, if you have any questions, text me or email me. See you soon.